Today on Ag News Daily.
So, that 58% of your population saying they're a farmer, you touch these farm policies, import policies, it's a big deal.
Well, welcome back to the weekly edition of the Ag News Daily Show. Do we need to reintroduce ourselves?
Maybe. We might have some new listeners after being at the Van Trump conference this week. And
yes.
We got to take home some prestigious hardware.
We did. The top ag influencers, a part of a group down there. It was a lot of fun to see people, see friends, and meet new friends.
Absolutely. And had a lot of good conversations about what the year ahead of us looks like.
We did get a weather update while we were down there. Of course, late this week and into next week in the Midwest, it's expected to be colder in temperatures and some snowfall. A significant cold air mass is on the horizon for next week through the 18th and 19th, bringing in a large system that could deliver more heavy precipitation. If another major system moves through later this week, water levels on the Mississippi and Ohio River systems are expected to remain at their high levels, again aiding in the transportation of crops. However, northern areas in the Mississippi Basin are becoming dry and could benefit from more rain and more snow. In the Corn Belt, rural travel conditions are gradually improving after a recent snow and ice storm that hit areas from Missouri to the Ohio Valley. Looking ahead in the 6 to 10 day forecast windows, it shows near or below temperatures across much of the country, with warmer than normal conditions expected near the Canadian border, from the northern Montana area to northwestern Minnesota. Most areas will see near or below normal precipitation, except for wetter than normal conditions in the northern plains, and from the southern Rockies into the western parts of southern Texas. So a vast area there, Delaney, that we're keeping an eye on. Additionally, we're watching the critical fire conditions ramping up again across southern California coastline late this week. They are in our thoughts and prayers as we see large wind gusts and unfortunate devastation.
Yeah, I think the latest toll was something like 17,000 acres.
Yeah, and unfortunately, double-digit deaths.
Mm-hmm. Well, farmer sentiment took a dip in December with the Purdue University and CME Group Ag Economy Barometer dropping 9 points to a reading of 136. This decline in farmer sentiment was mainly driven by a weaker outlook on current agricultural conditions, including commodity prices, as the index of current conditions fell 13 points. Despite the drop, it's still about 24 points above the low that was seen back in September and 5 points higher than we saw in October. The index of future expectations also saw a decrease down about 8 points. However, it still remains well above the September low, 59 points above and 29 points higher than October, indicating that much of the post-election optimism is still intact for rural America. The positive outlook seems to be fueled by expectations for a more favorable policy environment over the next few years. Meanwhile, the Farm Capital Investment Index, which had surged 13 points back in November, fell back 7 points in December. Overall, farmers' views on the current and long-term prospects for agriculture showed some contrast last month. Sentiment about current conditions and the one-year outlook was more cautious compared to what we saw back in November, but expectations for the next 5 years were notably more optimistic. Overall, farmers remain more optimistic about the future of their farms and the agricultural economy than they were at the end of the summer. And I think we saw that sentiment really carried out throughout this week at the Van Trump conference as well. FarmCon conference, I should call it.
I know, it's the same thing. It's a big family affair when you get down into Kansas City for this. I would agree. It seemed like there was cautious optimism, as far as to put it there. We did keep monitoring other topics here. A major development this past week with the International Longshoremen Association, or the ILA, and the U.S. Maritime Alliance, USMX, announced that their new 6-year contract is in place, averting a potential strike at the East and Gulf Coast ports that could have begun as early as next week, starting January 16th. The strike threats arose after the two sides failed to reach this new contract by last fall's deadline, leading to a temporary strike and an extension to get them to January 15th for negotiations. In a joint statement, the ILA and USMX said that this agreement protects the current ILA jobs and establishes framework for implementing technologies that will create more jobs, modernize our ports, enhance safety, and increase efficiency, ensuring the capacity needed to keep our supply chains strong. While this new contract is set, both parties will continue operating under the current agreement until the ILA's Wage Scale Committee can meet and hold their ratification vote. This is needed. The USMX members will also need to ratify their deal, so until then, the deals of the agreement will remain completely confidential. One of the key sticking points during the negotiations early on was the adoption of the automation technology. The ILA has consistently opposed increasing automation, fearing that this will lead to job losses, while USMX argued that the modernization is crucial for the U.S. ports to remain competitive, especially with those in Europe and in Asia. The specific technology that changes in the proposal will remain unclear until the contract is fully approved and fully released. So stay tuned, as we will have more updates as the ratification process moves forward.
Well, we're just a few weeks away here from the inauguration of President Trump. And a recent report from the Washington Post suggests that President-elect Trump's aides are now considering narrowing his proposed tariff plans to target only specific critical imports. However, Farm Policy News reported that President Trump has denied these claims. In a post on Truth Social, President Trump stated that the story, which quoted so-called anonymous sources that don't exist, incorrectly claims my tariff policy will be pared back. That is wrong. If this narrowed tariff plan were to materialize, it would mark a significant shift from the universal tariffs of 10 to 20% that President Trump proposed during his campaign. But economists warn that such tariffs could lead to higher consumer prices and disruptions in the global trade patterns. On the campaign trail, President Trump pledged to impose a 60% tariff on Chinese goods in particular, phase out imports of essential goods from China over 4 years, and implement a 25% tariff on goods from Mexico and Canada. A lot of question marks, though, around if that's even possible due to the USMCA agreement. President-elect Trump will be inaugurated on Monday, January 20th. We'll continue to monitor news in ag policy, especially in the first 100 days of office, since it often gives a good indication of a president's management style, priorities, and speed in implementing some of those campaign promises. So just right around the corner here.
One of the common things at FarmCon was also the see what 2025 brings for tax code. But there is ongoing concerns for U.S. farmers on the future of their international trade, especially related to ag products. In December, 43% of farmers identified the trade policy as their most critical issue for farms over the next 5 years in this survey that Purdue University put out, and according to the CME Ag Barometer that we reported on. We recently heard a panel discussion from leaders in this space at the National Association of Farm Broadcasting Convention, discussing some of the opportunities for ag exports. Dan Hallstrom, president and CEO of the U.S. Meats Export Federation, highlights some of those opportunities.
You look at the pork industry in Europe, it's imploding as we sit here today. Their production's down roughly 25% in the last 3 years. This is an obvious result, largely because of their regulatory policies and their overreach. A good example of what not to do. So we look at the global competition landscape where we used to run into Europe everywhere, especially Southeast Asia, for example, Japan, and other places. They're much less apparent today. And we're starting to see the Brazilians step up. We're starting to see other parts of the world get into that space that they used to occupy.
Well, Tanner, additionally, Kim Atkins, who's the Strategic Partnership Director with the U.S. Soybean Export Council, says there's opportunities for soybeans as well.
One of which, of course, is our sustainability, the sustainability of U.S. soy over other origins. We are the lowest carbon footprint compared to origins like Brazil and Argentina. So that's one important way in which we talk to customers about U.S. soy compared to other origins. Certainly on a nutritional level, we also differentiate in that regard the amino acid profile and energy content of U.S. soy over other origins. And so we work kind of in a number of different ways. And of course, I think it's important to also point out the reliability of the U.S. export supply chain and being able to be a continuously reliable supplier.
I think we heard that echoed at FarmCon this week also. So appreciate those comments. And there is some untapped potential in some parts of the world, according to Holstrom.
I look at some of these developing regions around the world that show a lot of promise for us. Central America, 10 years ago it was $30 million. Today it's $300 million. And there's more on top of that. You look at Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia, huge opportunities. Africa is just, you really shouldn't talk about Africa as a continent. There's about 20 different regions of Africa that have significant opportunities, but there is not a lot of established market access outside of South Africa. West Africa is a huge focus point for us, but so we need the administration to get a lot more aggressive on developing relationships and even free trade agreements in some of these emerging regions.
Besides reliability and supply ability, the way it gets shipped presents a great opportunity for growth for ag exports overall as well.
One of our strategic goals is to ship as much chilled that we can, never frozen, because then you create a value-added proponent to it. And the other advantage of shipping chilled versus frozen is that you're shipping 52 weeks of the year. So you take out that price component. They're buying whether the market's going up or going down versus frozen where, hey, I'll wait until the market goes lower, and you miss the ups and the downs. So shipping it chilled is a strategic advantage that we have, not only into Asia, North Asia, Southeast Asia, Mexico, 90-some% of the exports on our side are chilled going into Mexico.
We will be talking more about trade and what it means as the president changes and what the U.S. Grain Council is advocating for in a one-on-one interview with Andrew Brandt. He is the Director of Trade Policy later in today's episode.
This week, though, the USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service announced that 15 more states have joined the National Milk Testing Strategy, bringing the total to now 28 states. These states now account for 65% of the nation's milk production. According to a USDA press release, the goal of this initiative is to provide a clearer understanding of the presence of H5N1 among U.S. dairy herds. This information will help shape the strategy and response efforts to prevent the virus from spreading further. As of January 8th here, California and Texas are the only states with active detections currently of H5N1. However, the National Milk Testing Strategy could identify additional cases over time. All newly affected herds detected through this strategy will be reported on the USDA's interactive map of confirmed HPAI cases in livestock that you can find on their website. The map provides details on active and past detections, with additional information available by hovering over each state on that interactive map.
Well, there is more news on another related note. A 65-year-old with underlying health conditions has become the first person in the U.S. to die from avian influenza, or bird flu. According to the Food Safety News, the patient had been exposed to non-commercial backyard flocks and wild birds. Bird flu outbreaks have been reported in several states since April of 2024, although most human cases have been mild. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reports 66 human cases of bird flu in the U.S., with the majority experiencing only mild symptoms. The H5N1 is the strain that is responsible for this. It is widespread in birds globally and has led to outbreaks in the U.S. poultry and dairy cows. While the current risk to the public health remains extremely low, the CDC is closely monitoring the situation and collaborating with state agencies to track individuals exposed to infected animals. The CDC is also utilizing its flu surveillance system to watch for any signs of H5N1 in people. It is important to note that human infections with bird flu are rare and typically do not spread, Delaney, from person to person.
Yeah, very low risk, as you mentioned earlier. Well, Tanner, as we take a look here at some farm future survey news, early signs indicate that U.S. farmers are planning to increase their planted grain acres this year despite current lower prices. That's according to a recent survey done by Farm Futures magazine, part of course, the Farm Progress Group. I think the sentiment we heard this week is the U.S. actually is going to be looked at here in the future to scale back on acres, and that's going to be a huge shift in sentiment for farmers.
Yes, it will.
This survey, which closed back in late December, shows that farmers in major corn-producing states are being influenced by an ongoing corn rally. However, more than one half of those respondents say they don't plan to change their crop mix at all. This survey also highlighted that many farmers are holding out for better prices, as reflected in their marketing activity or sometimes lack thereof. A significant number of farmers are still holding on to their old crop bushels from 2024, with some even retaining grain back from 2023. About 48% of respondents said that their 2024 corn and soybean crops remain unsold. Additionally, farmers reported storing about 8% of their 23 crop and 5% of their soybean crop specifically, about 3% of their wheat still sitting in bins. This cautious approach underscores the uncertainty farmers are facing as they navigate, of course, these difficult market conditions ahead. And volatility was really, I think, the key word thrown around as it relates to the markets here for 2025.
Oh, I can't wait to hear about your next topic, Delaney.
Tanner, we're recording, of course, this morning on Friday, January 10th. And as we approach here the end of the week, we're likely going to see some guidance finally on the 45Z tax credit. Sources are indicating that we should receive updates as early as today on 45Z and the GREET model in the coming days. Now, this is multiple sources sharing this. Is likely Reuters released a story on Thursday afternoon that they have confirmed with sources close to the issue. And we have also personally confirmed with sources close to the issue that it's likely to come out today. We'll monitor this situation and provide you with the latest updates as they come in, and that might likely be a very big part of our show to cover next week.
I was going to say, we should have great news, or at least some news to bring you next week. We did mention earlier, though, that we're hearing all things trades in today's one-on-one conversation with Andrew Brandt, who, again, to remind you, is the Director of Trade Policy with U.S. Grains Council. So let's get into that interview after this message.
Calving season is a favorite time of year, but along with that special time are dangers, extra stress, and increased labor. Safety Zone calf catchers are all about safety and making processing new calves easier. Designed for ATVs or UTVs, one person can do the job and never be threatened by the protective mother cow. Make this and every calving season safer and easier with a Safety Zone calf catcher. Watch videos and customer testimonials or order yours today at safetyzonecalfcatchers.com or call 877-505-0914. Affordable and made in the USA. Make your upcoming and all future calving seasons safer, easier, and stress-free. Durable and designed to work anywhere you can drive your ATV or UTV. Order online at safetyzonecalfcatchers.com or call 877-505-0914 today.
I'm catching up with Andrew Brandt, the Director of Trade Policy for the U.S. Grains Council. Andrew, super excited to be chatting with you today. We're going to do some speculation about maybe what's ahead for 2025. I'm sure you're getting that question a lot lately after the elections here. But let's start first with a little bit of your background. Set it up for our listeners, who you are and how you found yourself in the trade space.
Sure. My name is Andrew Brandt. I've been in D.C. now for not quite 20 years. I grew up, I'm actually a farm boy from about an hour east of here in Missouri. Concordia is my hometown, still farm there with my dad and brother. So we were very typical, diversified row crop livestock Midwest farm, kind of middle-sized. So that's how I got my start. After in college, I did an internship with Senator Talent out in D.C. When I graduated, moved out there, bounced around, worked at USDA at the Crop Insurance Agency. Then I worked for a congressman from West Texas, and then Senator Grassley for about 7 years, handling his ag and trade portfolio. Then in 2021, I came here to the council, so that's my quick bio. So I've always been in ag. I like the industry. I love farming. But in my current role, I get to work on the policies that impact our export markets quite a bit.
Let's talk a little bit about 2024 before we look ahead to 2025. The last 4 years in general here under the Biden administration. Give us a little bit of a recap of where we're at now from a trade perspective and how that may set us up for what's ahead in 2025 with the new incoming administration?
So from our standpoint, and look at our exports, we're having pretty solid exports. It has been a bit of a roller coaster over the last several years because coming out of the Trump administration, you had kind of the first trade war there, and that impacts. Then we went into the disruption of the pandemic. Immediately following that, you had the Ukraine war, which kind of spiked up prices of everything. And now we're reverting to the mean, as economists might say. So it has been a roller coaster, really the last 6 years, even preceding the Biden administration. Overall, our exports are solid from a volume standpoint. Mexico last year set the all-time single country record for imports of U.S. corn at nearly 23.5 million metric tons. We always are pushing to do better, but our exports are solid. The value has come down because instead of shipping $7 corn, we're shipping, unfortunately, $4-something corn now. So the dollar value has come down a little, which also for people who have followed the trade deficit, that's not the only reason the U.S. suddenly went into a trade deficit, but it's a pretty big reason when corn and soybeans, which are the two of the largest volume exports of ag products, have that kind of price change. So overall, it's been a roller coaster, but through that all, we kind of maintained a consistent and solid pace, with the exception of maybe the pandemic that was a temporary shutdown. Moving forward, I think the potential of a new round of tariffs. I don't know the exact details of how those will look, but I do think I take the president and his team, President-elect Trump and his team, at their word when they say they're going to do it. I think they're going to do it. So I think at the very high level, I think us at the Grains Council, and I think probably the whole U.S. ag industry would say, well, we hope those are kind of a temporary means to an end, whether that's a leverage to get a new negotiation, on some of these other products, steel, aluminum, cars, car parts, that they focus on. I think what we would make us more sad is if there's kind of a new permanent set of tariffs. And I guess the tariffs on our side don't impact us, but the retaliatory tariffs from our trading partners that might be the response to those, could raise some eyebrows. But it's all speculation. We don't know the exact details yet. I want to be clear about that.
Absolutely. We understand that. Thanks for putting that caveat in there. I think the overall sentiment, at least being here listening to others in this kind of trade and policy space, is because President Trump has such a large rural constituency, a large base that supported him this election, a lot are feeling like he recognizes that and will give ag a seat at the table, so to speak, as he's getting ready to come into office and then take over and implement his policies as he sees fit. Is that a shared sentiment by U.S. Grains Council? And, with that hopefully potential seat at the table, what are you going to be advocating for on behalf of U.S. grain and producers that you guys work with?
I certainly hope so. We work with whichever administration from whichever party is there. It's our job to work with everyone on behalf of our members to increase exports. That mission kind of never changes for us. I think there are areas where there's the impact, but then there's also the negative impacts potentially, pending details, et cetera, et cetera. There's also opportunities to fix some other issues, like Brazil ethanol. They put a tariff against our ethanol shipments down there, whereas we are still letting their ethanol in here without a tariff. That's a very unfair situation. There's other areas in the world where there are tariffs and or SPS issues. On the sustainability front, you're starting to see a lot of things, specifically out of Europe. There's the EU deforestation regulation, which at the moment impacts soybeans and beef, but not corn, although I think corn eventually could be added. So that's a major issue. But then in addition to that, there's a very detailed... they set the MRLs for two chemicals known as neonicotinoids at basically zero. These are potentially could impact if they're used in like seed treatments. So if this were to be allowed to go through, and it is rather ridiculous, they set these tolerances at zero, which is lower than the world standards at like Codex. But the impact of that could be if you want to sell soybeans or corn to Europe, and if let's assume all these policies were speculate on Europe. They do full implementation of EUDR, and these MRLs for some of the neonics are set at 0. If you want to sell your corn or soybeans into Europe, you can't do deforestation, whatever that definition ends up being. I would say, you want to remove some brush on your farm, that's okay, but you're going to have to keep that grain separate. And then you're also not going to be able to use those seed treatments you may have become used to, and you got to keep that grain all separate. So a separate bin or some kind of isolation, identity preserved process to ship, to be eligible to even ship into Europe. Now, will there be a premium with that? Some people say yes. I don't know. But those are some of the longer term things we are tracking, in addition to the tariffs, et cetera, et cetera.
Talk to me a little bit more then about some of the work you're doing in addition to some that you just mentioned in other countries to continue to improve trade relationships. Maybe you can shed some specific color to the U.S.-Mexico arrangement with non-GMO corn, and also China. What's the future there? What is U.S. Grains Council doing to continue that relationship building?
Certainly. So like in Mexico, we have, we've got an office in Mexico City. We've got programming ongoing. We do a lot of joint member farmer missions. Sometimes we take our farmers down there. Sometimes we bring their industry people buying corn up here to kind of see how we're doing it. I think the Mexico situation, we had this question quite a few times recently, but from the industry perspective, the people we work with, there's really no problem. So, whether it's USMCA, the biotech decree, some of the other issues we make headlines on this side of the border, the people we are working with, they want access to corn to feed their livestock, and we want to sell it to them. So we're both kind of, working, just kind of trying to get through it together. With regard to China, we have an office there too. China has been a constant, always trying to increase those imports. It's, they've got, it's a very complicated system over there. I'm not sure anyone fully understands it's the government calling the shots, but whether, that's going through a quasi-private company, it's a very complicated situation. I think tariffs could potentially impact that, but they also, need a lot of corn there. They've got a very, they're the world's first or second most populous country, depending on who you're looking at. It's either China or India. And so they have a lot of resource needs. Hopefully, some of that will be filled with U.S. corn, and they're a big sorghum buyer right now. They need resources, and we want to sell them to them. Hopefully, that'll continue.
Yeah, and I would echo your sentiment on Mexico in particular. Having conversations with Mexican farmers, a lot of them are very pro-trade, pro-U.S. trade in particular. So hopefully, we can continue to see that. Getting into the works here with the new administration, as you look beyond 2025, maybe some of the immediate focuses with Mexico and China, what are some of those other countries that might be low-hanging fruit that the U.S. Grains Council is focused on building relationships with?
I don't know if any country counts for low-hanging fruit when it comes to market development, but I'll tell you where we're working. So 2 years ago, we opened an office in India. As far as I know, we're still the only U.S. ag cooperator that has done that. I think, very logically, you say, well, the China relationship is very complicated. Where else can we find demand? Oh, let's go to the other billion-person country in the world. But that takes time. Our office head director, country director in India, Reese, he came to our February conference, as all our country directors do, and he was talking about, just the basics of India. They got 1.3 billion people. He pointed out it's 58% of that population identifies themselves as a farmer. So anytime you talk about touching or allowing imports of something that, protect, and it's a democracy, so, that 58% of your population saying they're a farmer, you touch these farm policies, import policies, it's a big deal. It's twice the number of people we have in this country identify as farmers in India. So that's one side on the political side. The other side is, again, with that many people, you got a lot of resource needs. So if you want to, move to a cleaner burning fuel to help the air quality in some of those mega cities, you're going to need access to ethanol. If you want to use your own feedstock to create that fuel, and you got to backfill those feedstocks going to, presumably your livestock industry with something. So it's, that's an area, that's a country we're, looking at and working on. Hopefully, in the next couple of years. President Trump actually in his first term tried to do an India trade deal. We didn't quite get there, but maybe this time he will. And then also Africa, doing a lot of work there on like teaching their people about how we feed poultry with, corn, soy, compound feed mixes, as well as just personally, I've gone over there and kind of talked to them about how the biotech process works. I think in the U.S., specifically, a lot of people here are very comfortable with biotech. But you go to places in Africa, it's actually, I would describe it as they are kind of where we were in the mid to late 90s on like trying to comprehend and understand biotech. So a lot of the questions we get are very basic, and I would say a lot of people here, especially here at this conference, would kind of all take for granted. But they just, it hasn't, they've just been trying to get by and live, and they live a lot of them live a subsistence life. And they also have some agitator activists that come down from Europe and spread misinformation. So, I was over there. I went to Rwanda to the African Poultry Conference about a month and a half ago now. And, some of the questions I got were very basic, but then also just kind of explaining, all right, these biotech traits, this is not like a very short-sighted process. This is the regulatory approval is like a decade long, if not longer. And before these traits are made available to our farmers in the U.S. to even plant, they have to clear the U.S., Brazil, China, Japan, Europe of all places. And when I pointed out, there might be some European activists coming down here saying GMOs are bad, but I would point out their government's approving them, saying they're safe. And those are kind of some of the things that we do to, science-based approach to this. The things we do to, in the long term, try and open up these markets for U.S. grains.
Great. Andrew, thank you so much for your time today. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think that's it. A lot of farmers may not be that familiar with us, and the reason is you see us overseas, we are basically prohibited. We don't. Our mission is not to spend our dollars here, so we do a lot of work overseas. Our farmer members who are paying their checkoffs may not always see that, but I assure you we are doing their work overseas to try and open up new markets.
Great. Andrew, thanks again.
Thank you.
Well, Delaney, what's happening this week in markets?
Well, markets were certainly a big part of the discussion at FarmCon this week. Of course, we've got the WASDE report dropping later today at 11 a.m. Central Time on Friday. 45Z tax guidance should also come out today, and those are two really big market movers here to create some potentially large fireworks effects for the market. The trade is expecting to see USDA reduce corn ending stocks on the WASDE report for a seventh consecutive month. We're also expecting to see a larger Brazilian bean harvest noted, and potentially some small cuts to U.S. yield for the 2024 growing season. Now, January is the report where we see those finalized growing season numbers shared by USDA. And as of the recording this week, that report, of course, has not yet dropped, but we'll be sure to share some of those market updates on how they impact the market in next week's show. But looking at Twitter, I've seen a lot of market analysts and brokers who are expecting some sort of fireworks effect, albeit either from the WASDE report or from that 45Z tax credit guidance.
I was waiting this week for those talking about this topic to say a smaller crop gets smaller, but you can't because this was a large crop. It just has been shrunk, like it stated, for the seventh report in a row.
It has. I think the question mark is a lot of growers saw drier soybeans when they were in the field. We had an unusually dry harvest season in a lot of parts of the corn states and bean states, but is that enough to really reduce yields by a significant amount? A lot of analysts are suggesting not, but USDA has a tendency to surprise us on these reports.
That's right. If you want to keep up with updates coming from Ag News Daily, make sure you follow us on all of our social media platforms. We encourage you to send us ideas and suggestions for more events to attend or more interviews to do. So it's great to have that interaction with you. But for today, Delaney, what do you say? Should we let the listeners go?
Let's let them go.